You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
As always, said the sidekick.
Yeah, as always. So I sent you some information. Number one, let me say up front that you are the voice of reason oftentimes.
One hopes.
In my life and also on this podcast. And we started this to be very clinical, and sometimes I go a different direction with that. But this is actually one that I think is very, very clinical. But I wanted to start this off by saying the reason that I sent you this particular article, do you know why?
Because you were mad at the time?
Nope.
Oh.
Although I do have a lesson, I do have a story about why I sent it to you.
Well, tell the story, Mike.
So you know I build models.
That's why I said tell the story.
And if anybody sees this on the internet, they'll see models on the shelves that I've built. I was building a model, and I've never done this before. And then after it happened, I was kind of surprised that I'd never done it before. But I was working on a model, and I dropped it on the floor, and it shattered like it was made of porcelain. And I was just livid. And we've talked, about clinical stuff before and wanting this show to be very clinical. And I sat there and I went through a lot of the things that this article talks about with thinking about where I'm at, what I'm doing, because I anticipated, I could just wreck my entire workshop. I could scream and curse and break things. And
you considered those options at the time?
I did. I actually did. I actually was sitting there and I was thinking, I really want to break something. And then I was like, wait a minute, anything that I break here is mine and I'm going to be sorry for later. And I actually was able to rein myself
back
in.
From the precipice.
Yeah. And then I thought, we've got to do a show about this. And so then I started looking around and for some good reference material, and I found this article, and this article is from Australia, where our biggest fan lives. And the article has a button on it that allows you to click it, as a lot of the internet now has gone to, where you can hear the story read in audio. And if you click that button, the guy reading it has an Australian accent.
I'm not sure my internet does that.
It does. There's a button up at the top that says listen.
With technological proficiency will have to teach me that.
Yeah, but so that was why you got this particular article. So the story is, I was building a model, I broke my model, and I was really upset, and then I did a lot of the things that this article talked about. I wanted to do a show on this, so I found an article. I didn't accidentally found an article from Australia, and that's why you got the particular article that you did. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why we got this article. But I think that this is clearly one of the top, I'm going to say 5, would you say 5 issues that people deal with in therapy?
I would say it's one of the top 5 issues with which they should deal in therapy. But I find that a lot of people are acculturated, socialized, to deny their anger because it's not acceptable in their home of origin.
Right.
So if I grow up in a house with a dictatorial father who's allowed to express his anger, I'm not going to be allowed to express mine.
Which you did. You grew up in exactly that house.
So one of the ways that you learn to survive in that kind of a household is to become somewhat or totally dissociative. So you suppress your anger and you don't recognize when you feel it. Then that shows up in therapy when people have explosive moments like you felt when you dropped the model. I remember as a young adult, before I matured and became so sophisticated, changing spark plugs in a car and trying to put a torque wrench on the spark plug to get it loose or tighten it, whichever it was. And the thing slipped, and I barked my knuckles on the engine, and they started bleeding, and I just surged with frustration and anger, and I threw the wrench across the wall, and the side wall of the garage was had what?
Drywall?
Thank you.
Sheetrock?
Sheetrock, yeah, and it stuck in the sheetrock. So then I had to have the sheetrock repaired. I had to get my knuckles repaired. I had to explain to my wife what I'd done. And she laughed at me appropriately, but anyway, the point being, you get these surges out of nowhere, like road rage, that you don't see coming. You don't feel like you're susceptible to them, but they happen to you in a blind moment, and you do something that may have consequences for the rest of your life.
Right.
You may kill somebody in a road rage accident because you were an idiot, and you lost control of yourself. So in therapy, sometimes what you deal with is helping people to recognize that's an issue in the patterns of their behavior. Part of once they begin to see that, part of the conversation then becomes, is anger a good thing or a bad thing? Because many of them have heard the shame-based message that anger is not acceptable, anger is not good. If you're a Christian, you can't be angry. So you have to work on teaching the feeling of anger itself is original issue equipment. You are born feeling anger when you are frustrated, when you don't get what you want. When a baby doesn't get what it wants, it gets mad. It bites, it hits, it does whatever until it learns that's not an acceptable way to express that. So part of the parenting responsibility of parents is to teach your child how to model, release, and take care of their anger. And you do that by modeling that for them. How do you take care of your anger?
Right.
In many households.
And so many people parent through the philosophy of do as I say, not as I do.
Well, yeah, because they don't realize people are watching what they do, and especially kids.
Or that it matters.
Or that it matters, absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of people grow up in a household that says big people hit little people. Little people don't hit people. You know, so I can hit you, but you can't hit me. You can't hit your brother. You can't hit the kid down the street. But if you mess up, I won't hit you.
So let me tell you, this is something that I tell people in therapy, and then you let me know if you agree with this. I agree 100% that anger is OEM, so it's original equipment that we come with as
human being.
People. Right. So it's ingrained in us. But the function evolutionarily of anger is to activate the fight or flight syndrome. So it's about a survival mechanism, and it's about being able to defend oneself. So
it's a physiological surge that you feel in your body.
And the baby gets angry because the baby perceives that a need's not being met, whether or not that's a selfish thing or not. We talked about that everybody needs a healthy amount of
that's sort of an anthropomorphic
narcissism
explanation. Because the presumption in the conversation is the baby's thinking about that.
It's automatic. It's inbred. It's an instinct.
It just happens.
But what I tell people is, if that's the case, then anger in our society not only should not be the most common, it is the most common emotion expressed, it should actually be the least common, because there's so few cases for us as adults to really be in a situation that we should perceive as life or death. And that's really where anger should be activated.
Where we live in our world today.
Exactly.
Evolutionary history
in an industrialized First Nation. Now, obviously, there are some places where, yes, anger still it does serve a biological function, but we don't live there. And so what I'm challenging people to do is to reframe.
If we choose an environment, like you're a special forces combat soldier.
Right. Yes.
You choose to go into an environment where that can be triggered more readily, and it can have survival benefits.
Yes.
If you learn what you need to learn about harnessing your reaction and your behavior under fire, so that you do productive things for yourself, for your agenda, for your goal. But one of the things clinically that I find to be a fascinating reality is that I often have to teach people anger words, labels. You have to label that feeling so that they can recognize it. And usually their label is different because it denies or suppresses the reality that what they're feeling is rage or anger.
And that's exactly why I teach people about the fact that we really don't don't want to say shouldn't, that there's not,
shouldn't say should.
It's not as effective to experience anger, because most of what we experience in the world that we live in is hurt that gets mislabeled as
labeling
anger.
is important. Words you use matter.
Yeah.
And so what I find in these situations is that many people don't have a discrete vocabulary. They have one word, rage, and they call it anger. Rage is not anger. It's anger in all caps.
Mm-hmm.
But before I get to rage, there are other feelings that I will have that can be discreetly identified and labeled.
So you're trying to teach them the spectrum that anger can fall within, and because you can recognize it earlier than when you get to white hot rage.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You have to. And so that's a lesson they did not learn in their childhood.
Mm-hmm.
So in therapy, you try to teach them to reparent themselves and learn and internalize the lessons that they want to operate from as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of my agenda then is to teach them twofold thing. One is, here's the vocabulary that you can identify with a particular feeling state. The other one is it has to be externalized. You have
mm-hmm.
to say it out loud. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any difference if you don't say it out loud.
To another person, or just say it out loud to yourself?
Driving the car.
Mm-hmm.
Driving down the car, I'm
angry.
Coming up to a red light, the
mm-hmm.
light changes to yellow, and I get a flush of something.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I'm irritated,
mm-hmm.
I'm miffed, I'm angry, I'm pissed, whatever it is that I say,
mm-hmm.
but I'm not rageful. I'm not going to run through the red light because, by God, you don't get that far. You mm-hmm. have to learn not to get that far. And
mm-hmm.
the way that you learn not to get that far is to learn to identify the sequence stages of intensity with a label and with a feeling that you can apply to the label. So you mm-hmm. can say, oh, I'm irritated, I'm miffed, I'm mad, I'm angry. And you start saying that out loud to yourself. You hear yourself say it. And you recognize that the lightning doesn't flash and God doesn't punish you and your parents don't come beat you. And you got away with saying, I'm mad. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't like that. I'm mad. I don't want that. I'm angry. And you can say that at a lesser cost than a rage explosion mm-hmm. that might end someone's life. I mean, it happens in households all over America where there are guns available.
Right.
More people die from handgun wounds because somebody got rageful and pulled a trigger.
Right. So let's take our break, and then, as I always do, when we come back, I'm going to ask a question.
All right.
If you've gotten this far into the show, then obviously you find the show to be worthwhile, beneficial, maybe even helpful. And so I just wanted to say, if you've gotten this far into the show and you want to help us out, even if you don't want to help us out, just do it anyway. Go to Apple Podcasts and rate us and leave a review. That is super helpful. Subscribe to the show on YouTube and hit the bell icon so that you get notifications when new shows drop. That stuff is really, really helpful for us. And I know that Mr. Brett agrees.
Absolutely. Reviews are positive. Positive reviews are more positive, but negative ones are as well, because it helps you decide how to focus and how whatever you're intending to say is being heard.
And the secret is the algorithm doesn't care whether the review's positive or negative.
As our friend Mike Norton says regularly, feedback is a gift.
If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and so I see the legitimacy, the goodness, the value of what you're saying with saying that out loud. You have to make that manifest in the world. If you just think it to yourself, then you could be flying under the radar. Is that your...
I talk to clients. You have to feel it, you have to label it, you have to externalize it. Mm-hmm. If you don't do all three of those, you aren't going to change.
Right. So the idea there would be, if you approach the red light...
Well, you feel something change in your body.
Yeah.
You change a flush of irritation or frustration, or your heartbeat increases, or you break out in a sweat, or you clench your teeth,
right.
Your jaw muscle tightens, whatever it might be that you may be unaware of mm-hmm. at today's moment. Because you don't know that you do that. You don't think that you do that. Mm-hmm. You think you're not an angry man. You think, well, mm-hmm. I know I'm not. Nobody tells me that. But they do. So what we want to teach you is be more physically self-aware. Mm-hmm. And when a situation comes up, put a label to it.
But the speaking it out loud stops the process. So if you don't speak it out loud, the process is autonomic. It's automatic. It's going on inside you. And then you get to white hot rage. If you speak it out loud, now you've stopped the process, and it gives you the ability now to walk back from the precipice.
Or it allows a detour.
Yeah.
You can go somewhere else, you go in a different direction.
Just like when I was talking about, I was building that model, and I thought, I could break everything in this workshop, but it's all my stuff. I'm not doing myself any favors by doing that. I was actually able to see that. Now, this is the question I want to ask you. So I've been musing about this for a while now.
Yeah.
This happened about a week ago. And what I am thinking is, I wonder if, because I used to be I would fly off the handle for no reason whatsoever, partially because of my upbringing.
There were reasons, but they were suppressed.
But they weren't valid. But
they don't have to be valid.
No, I know. But what I'm saying is that am I able now to see this because I've gotten older and I'm more mature and hopefully more wise, or is my hormonal balance different, and now it's easier because the testosterone doesn't just course through my veins the way that it did when I was in my 20s? Is it a combination, or does it matter? So that's really, this is the question that I'm pondering right now.
So I think it matters. I think there are minimum of two ingredients. One is, you no longer live in an oppressive child as a powerless, an oppressive household as a powerless child, less power than anybody else in the house. So now you have alternatives that you didn't have earlier. Now you're not forced to suppress. And you may have learned that as a child because it was a survival skill. As you experience life, you have opportunities to learn better skills. You have opportunities to become more refined in your independent operation. And so what we are saying, and of course your life history and the things that you've studied and so on, you've learned this thing about anger is not inherently evil, bad, or wicked. And sometimes it's useful and productive. It can lead to motivation. I can get mad about being trapped in this job where my boss doesn't respect what I do, overworks me and underpays me, and expects me to come in early and clean everything up and stay late and clean everything up and be the one that's on call all day while he sits at home and eats bonbons. How I feel. And I get frustrated and angry. And so then I may do damaging things. I may compromise a file or throw out some trash that isn't trash, or mark the bathroom wall with obscenities.
Put a tack on his seat.
Yeah, I mean, people do things like that because they feel violated, they feel trapped, they feel disrespected or unrespected. So I feel all that stuff. I can use that anger as a justification for an impulse that does damage and gets me fired. Or I can use that anger as a motivation that says, you need to get a different job.
Right.
When I say, I can't get a different job. I don't have a college degree. I don't have this set of skills. I can't go get this job. And then I can use the anger to say, go get the skills and then get the job. Well, it takes too long. I don't want to.
So in my question about, is this because I've gotten older and more mature and wiser, or could it be a biological thing? The reason why I think... I
ignored that part of your question.
Yeah, but the reason why I think that matters is, I mean, first off, if I'm talking to an adolescent and I'm saying, look, you can learn to have better control over your anger, if it's just a biological process, then I'm blowing smoke up his skirt, because he really can't, because it's a biological process.
Okay.
But I don't believe that, so I don't really believe...
I think he can.
I think he can learn it too. Because I don't think, that's what I'm saying, is I don't think that it's just because I've gotten older and my hormones have changed. I think there may be a part of that. I think that may be a real thing, but I think I have actually gotten older and wiser, and I just want to say out loud, I was really proud of myself, because that's the first time that I've ever been in a situation like that where it was sparked. The anger was sparked just at something
dampened.
Yeah. And I was able to think my way through it. I was able to see, I have this alternative behavior, or I have this alternative behavior, and I can choose. And I was able to do that in real time. And it was the first, I'm a 60-year-old man, and it was the first time in my life that I can remember being able to think my way through it. And I think we can teach that skill.
I agree that we can teach that skill. I also think there are other layered skills
Of course, yeah.
that may have to be unlearned. For instance, I may have
You must
learned,
unlearn what you have learned. That's a Yoda phrase. Go ahead.
I may have learned to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs as a way to suppress anger that I couldn't afford to feel. I may have learned to use humor inappropriately as a way to savage somebody instead of showing them a clenched fist,
Right.
or threatening them in some way.
Just Mike Norton's statement is a kind of an example of that. It's a much more benign example, but the idea of saying, feedback is a gift when you don't really mean that.
Well, I think he came to mean it. I don't think he started out there. I think it's a survival skill. It's one of those adaptations.
Yeah, exactly.
Like saying I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm whatever.
Right. But you can come up with those things and say, what's less invasive? Is it more invasive for me to dress this person down? Obviously it is.
Or what's less expensive?
Okay. So
Can
tell
I
me about
afford
that.
The choice
tell me about that.
Here?
What do you mean?
Well, I have gotten myself in trouble because I couldn't control my mouth. As a matter of fact, as a child growing up, my father used to say regularly, your mouth is going to overload your ass. And on occasion, it did. Because I would just flash and say something in a wrong audience, a wrong place, a wrong way, and it would cost me more than I could afford. So I had to learn to be more aware and more discreet about what I would say.
So there are emotional and social economics
Yes.
that are a part of this process, and part of therapy is helping people recognize that economic process and make choices that cost them less.
I came to grips with this in my own life when I was driving down the highway with my wife in a car. Somebody cut me off and gave me the finger, and I had a road rage moment, and I sped up and caught him and passed him and slammed on the brakes. And my wife is screaming, "What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What are you doing? Let me out of the car!" And all of a sudden it just broke, and I was shaking, I was crying, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm terrified! I almost killed us for what? Because somebody gave me the finger? Because somebody beat me to the exit? Because somebody? Why do I let them have control over my life?" So then I really started to work on that.
But even more than that, I mean, even if you take away, even if you say that it's hyperbole to say, "Oh, I could have killed us" or whatever, you caused trauma to your wife.
Yes.
Is that
Someone
worth
I love.
it?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. There was an unintended consequence from which I learned, but she paid the price. So I had to make that up to her.
Well, and you do make it up, but I think that this is something that is so essential to the therapeutic process, and that I would really like for people who are listening to this, if you do therapy, to really understand that helping people conceptualize this idea of an economic and social, an emotional and social economy is very real.
That's a central part of any kind of therapy. The cost of your choices. Can you afford them? Are you willing to pay them?
Right.
But in doing therapy, one thing you have to be aware of, there are comments in the vernacular of the English language that people use regularly, like "don't get mad, get even." That is not a clinically therapeutic positive that people will recite. People will say like, "Oh, I internalize that." You're like, "There's a God in heaven. Don't get mad, get even." And you have to say again, well, what is the cost of getting even?
Right.
And there are hidden costs and there are visible costs. And some of the hidden costs are more expensive, and the bill doesn't come due for a long time. But so that's true for a lot of different situations and emotions. What we're talking about today is, can we confront the reality that anger is original issue equipment? It's neither good or bad.
Right.
It's useful in terms of providing some information. You can learn to manage it in disparate ways, some of which are beneficial, some of which are not. So in therapy, you have an opportunity to say, let's look at that, let's learn from that, let's change if that would be beneficial. That's what therapy is about. How can we take what's going on in your life and deal with it in such a way that you make better decisions and you have less expensive costs?
So conclude this whole thing, let's just run through a little bit of the list that's in the article that I'm going to post. So the first thing is that you have to, my mouse has gone to sleep. So the first thing is that you have to recognize the warning signs. So then we all...
You didn't throw it against the wall.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
So we all, that's a lot of what we've been talking about is recognizing the warning
Physiological
signs.
symptoms.
And sometimes, people come into therapy and they'll say, I flashed a white hot rage and there's nothing in between. And we have to say to them, no, there's a lot of real estate in between and we got to work our way backwards. You may not be aware of all of the physiological changes that happen in your body, but you don't just flash.
Right.
And people really believe that they do.
Well, and they may not know how to feel it.
Yeah.
Because, again, if they are dissociative, if they've been able to survive because they suppress their own body awareness, then you have to teach them to have it. And so
and that's when we walk through and I say to people, where do you feel, if I ask you to feel anger in your body right now, where is it? And talk to me about it. And we all feel anger different ways. And that's the price, or that's the educative process of helping them to understand.
Well, I'll give you an example. If I'm talking to you and I notice that every time we get close to a sensitive subject, I have to spend some time with you and I have to learn what's going on in your life. But I notice, because you're trained to observe body language, that you rotate your right shoulder every time we talk about your mother.
Yeah.
Then I need to start pointing that out to you and say, what does that mean? What's your right shoulder feel?
Are you even aware that you do that?
No, you're doing it, yeah.
Because as you've aptly pointed out, a lot of times the first initial reaction is, no, I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And
but then after a while,
therapist, you say, okay, sorry, I misunderstood. Do you mind if I continue to say those things as I observe them so that I can hear you accurately?
Right.
It's really important that I get it accurate.
And then second on the list is to work out why you're angry. And I think that for a therapeutic intervention is oftentimes, that's the nut.
I used to tell teenagers who developmentally were not there, but were on the journey, and they were explosive in their rage, get a wiffle ball bat, go down to the basement, and I'll tell the parents, you know what, as long as they do it in the basement, whatever they say down there, gall darn it, I hate you, you ugly old wombat.
And as long as they're not breaking anything.
Circle, and they're just hitting the support post in the basement with a wiffle ball bat, not damaging anybody or themselves, that'd be fine. And you have to let that go because they have to get it out. Otherwise, it's going to explode somewhere that's going to have costs you don't want to pay.
Right. But a lot of times we may be angry because we feel like that our spouse is, no longer loves us. But then we get angry because we go to work and somebody, says something.
Oh, displacement.
Yeah. And so a lot of times.
That's a conversation for another day.
Right. But you working out why you're angry is important, because if you don't understand why you're angry, you can't do anything about it. Yeah. And so a lot of times we're angry for reasons that aren't what triggered the angry response.
That's an opportunity cost, an opportunity target.
And then the third one on here is write it down, which is beneficial. We've all talked about journaling. I think I've used that more in therapy than you have, but it is a common practice.
I don't mean to be dismissive of it. It's absolutely usable
it's a podcast.
For some people.
They didn't see you be dismissive, but... and then the next one, though, is count to 100. And this is one that I've always believed in. And the reason is because, an emotional reaction is in an area of your brain called the limbic system. And rational thought happens in an area of your brain called the cortex. And your cortex and your limbic system can't be activated at the same time. So if you choose to engage in a rational process, it closes down the emotional reaction.
So what if I'm really frustrated? Can I count by 2s or 5s or 10s?
You can count by however you want, right. But this is what because we've always worked with adolescents, and kids will get really, really angry, and then the parents will say, "Go do your homework." I'm like, that's crazy. Yeah. They're angry; they can't do a rational thing. So the first thing you got to do is get them out of this emotional reaction. Now, engaging in some kind of rational process will help, but you can't tell them to go do their homework. That's just going to be more frustrating. So the first thing you got to do is get yourself out of the emotional response.
It's a power play.
Yeah. Well, of course. And I want you out my face because you're...
It's not meant to be helpful.
It's
meant to get you out, Yeah.
So then number 4 is press pause, and we've all talked about take a break from whatever is making you angry, and that is always a really good thing. Move your body is number 6. Talk to somebody.
These are all compensatory strategies for ADD as well.
Yeah. So I just wanted to end this by telling everybody what I did. So I was building this model, and I dropped it, and it just shattered. And
you started adding the price of everything in the room you were going to destroy?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I did. And then I thought, okay, I'm not going to do that. And so, my first reaction was, I got to fix this. And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, you can't fix this. And so I just took up the pieces and I put them in a box, and I haven't even looked in the box yet. So I actually don't know how bad the damage is. I might actually be able to fix it, but I didn't even try. I just put it all in a box, and I got another model out of my stash, because anybody who builds models, you've got several models that are in a stash, and that was just a really easy, simple to do.
And as addicts have learned, let go and let God.
Yeah. And I just said, I'm just going to start on a different project, and I did, and I got immersed in this new project, and it was amazing how quickly that initial flash of anger was able to dissipate if you let it.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to let it.
Well, if you direct it, if you release it in an appropriate outlet, which is what therapy is supposed to help you teach
Hopefully.
or learn. Yeah.
All right, so hopefully that was beneficial for people. As we want to say, if you want to get a hold of us, you can reach us through psychwithmike.com, and we'd love to hear show suggestions. Please, please, please subscribe to us and give us reviews on Apple Podcasts. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed.
As we are wont to say, that's W-O-N-T, as opposed to as we want to say, which is W-A-N-T.
Correct.
Which is totally irrelevant to anything, but it flashed through my head.
It flashed through your head. I'm glad you got it off your chest. Yeah. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.
Because language matters.
Language matters.
How long?